Welcome to the book launch. It is Tuesday, December the 8th, for Jane Cleland and her most recent Josie Prescott Antiques mystery called Hidden Treasure, which you can see has an interesting cat on the cover, which we will get to. It's an Egyptian-style cat. Those of you who love the Amelia Peabody mysteries will remember the cat Bastet. Right, Jane?
Yes, hello.
Hi. Did you ever read the Amelia Peabody mysteries?
I've read some. I'm not sure I've read that one.
Okay, well, Bastet, the cat, was prevalent. So you've obviously got cats and Egyptian in this wonderful book. So Jane writes with authority because she once owned a New Hampshire-based antiques and rare book business. And one of the joys of reading this series, the Josie Prescott series, is all the cool stuff you learn about antiques along with the mystery. So they've kept me hooked for ages. Jane, where did you get, we haven't talked for a little while, where did you get the inspiration for Josie Prescott and an antiques series?
The original inspiration came from a failed endeavor. My first mystery did not sell, but I got really nice rejections. And the nicest rejection came from Ben Sevier at St. Martin's Minotaur, who in his letter to my agent said, the plot and the narrative, and it was a male private eye in New York, and the market isn't strong for that right now, but she can write. And you know what? I lived on that for a year. And then he said, what I'm really looking for right now is female, amateur, not New York. If she wants to give it a whirl, I'd like to see it. So I spent several months thinking about that. You need someone who does research organically if you're going to use an amateur sleuth. And I did know a fair amount about the rare book business. We dabbled a little bit in antiques, but it was a rare bookstore. And of course, when people sell you rare books, they also want you to buy the bookshelf and the fountain pen and whatever else. So I knew about the process. It had been based in New Hampshire, and so if I'm thinking not New York, I thought New Hampshire would be a good choice. It's an interesting juxtaposition. I had Josie move from New York to New Hampshire to start fresh, and this idea of finding community against the rugged, isolated, hard-living coast of New Hampshire, I thought that would work well. So that's why Josie, that's why New Hampshire, and then that's really why antiques. I pick the pivotal antique in each of the stories, and there's always at least one or two others that are featured, based on, it's actually quite hard to find a worthy antique. It has to be something worth killing for. It has to be interesting enough, and I have to be able to access research. I have to be able to learn about it, so it can't be a one-off without context.
Well, that all certainly makes sense. I think New Hampshire makes sense because if she's going to expand her antiques business, then it will be a success. She has to have access to bigger populations. So, you have Boston in the area, you've got New York, you've got, even if the rugged coast of New Hampshire is isolated, it's not any great distance for people to come down there. And one of the things I've really enjoyed about the series is the way you have grown Prescott's Antiques from a, fairly modest beginning into a big powerhouse. But to do that credibly, you do need to have a market. There's so many amateur sleuth books that have, these improbable juxtapositions of a chocolate shop in a town of 2,000 on the shores of Lake Erie or something. And, it's just not credible that's a sustainable business, or that the person who owns it can be absent from it while sleuthing and expect it to go well. So you've given Josie a fairly large staff almost from the beginning, which frees her up to go do things.
Yes, thank you. I've gotten a couple of reviews that say I've managed to create a company, a place where everybody wants to work.
Yeah.
And that really is very pleasing to me. I tried to do that. I have an MBA in addition to an MFA, so I do have a business orientation, and I enjoy that part of it very much. In terms of Josie's business growing, there's two branches. There's the tag sale and the monthly high-end themed auctions. And nowadays, everything, and this is true, of course, everything is done via internet and phone. Christie's, Sotheby's, they hold their auctions, and there's actually going to be very few people in the audience. It's almost all done remotely.
Yeah, well, it is, which gives you, no boundaries as long as you're able to reach your market. But one of the things I like about Josie is that there's never a new opportunity that you throw at her that she isn't willing to at least try. And she does that with her staff as well. If her staff comes up with an interest, she enables them, and that resonates with me because I've tried to run the Poison Pen that way. If I have a staff member who, I have one, for example, now who's really big in romance. So, that's his thing, and he's developed a whole romance department that we didn't have before. We have another one who's science fiction oriented. And, I think it's great that the staff brings things through their own enthusiasm to the core business and lets it grow. So Josie's not a micromanager, and I like to think I'm not either, although my staff might disagree with me. But honestly, I don't really think I am, and part of that's because I work at home. And in this new book, that is a big thing for Josie because she has invested in, she and her new husband, who's been a great guy throughout the series, they have invested in a gingerbread Victorian, and it's going to need really major work, isn't it?
Every inch. It has electricity from the 1960s, and 60-watt light bulbs are the top of the line there. So it needs infrastructure renovation, and then of course cosmetic as well. And they're trying to be very respectful for the charm and the craftsmanship, which is of course part of why they chose it, right, and the location right on the ocean. But they're trying to retain the woodworking and some of the molding, and that's not so easy. It adds an extra layer of expense. It's always easier to just destroy everything.
Well, that's true. And a gingerbread Victorian, by definition, is a house that has all kinds of embellishments. I mean, that was the style. And you see these wonderful photos of them, where they're quite ornate.
Yeah.
And so, to try to put like new electrical systems and new plumbing and, internet, make it a smart house, so to speak, without destroying that is a real challenge. So that's running in the background the whole time of Hidden Treasure. And as I say, I especially like that. But to go back to the staff, how do you decide which new idea the staff member is going to get? Are these things that interest you that you run across and you think, okay, I'll give it to this person on the staff and let them do it?
Years ago, like around book 2, 3, I think 3, my editor took me out to lunch and said, you got to tell Josie to get a grip. She's still upset about, let me just, in 2 sentences, explain the backstory.
Sure.
Josie was caught up in the big price-fixing scandal that happened at a couple of the major antiques houses here in New York. That actually happened. Now, in my books, Josie was the whistleblower. Well, you know what happens to whistleblowers. It's not so nice. She got chased out of her job for not being a team player. She lost most of her friends. She was hounded by the press. It was really horrible. And then a couple of weeks later, her boyfriend at the time, who is always and only referred to as Rick the Cretin, dumps her for being a downer, his word. And a couple of months after that, her father dies. She guided herself, and still does, by her father's precepts. one of which was, when you feel as if you're at the end of your rope, tie a knot and hang on. And if you can't hang on, move on. Well, she hung on for a year, and then she couldn't do it anymore, and she moved on. And that's why she moved to New Hampshire to start the new business, to start a new life. She is committed to doing the right thing. That is a guiding principle. And part of that is nurturing her staff and being open to new ideas. But along this time, around book 3, I was still having her be sorrowful and mournful. And that's when my editor told me that she had to move on. That really, I mean, I had to rewrite the whole manuscript. It was a kind of nightmare experience, but I did it. And Josie lived on. And what it taught me was the bigger picture lesson, that if you want your series to last, if you're writing a series, all of the ensemble characters have to have their own lives and motivations and challenges. Excuse me. I'm going to sip water. I get so excited.
It's all right. Just relax. It's very informal here, so get comfortable.
Sorry. Sorry. I do get very excited when I talk about it. Okay. So, the characters have to have their own lives and motivations and interests. In other words, you're not writing the same book over and over and over again. Things have to happen. So, one of the issues, one of the ways I think about it, is who hasn't had something happen to him or her for a while? And then that becomes a little bit of a featured story.
So you go ahead and relax for a minute, and I'll do a peroration here while you're doing that. One of the
Thank you, Barbara.
It's perfectly fine. Do not worry. It's difficult, when books are required to have labels or put into subgenres, which I really dislike. Here at the Poison Pen, we have one giant file, alphabetical by author, so we can actually find the books, but we don't like subgenre. And cozy is a word that means different things to different people. If you're talking about a British cozy, what you're basically talking about is a traditional mystery. The British consider P.D. James a cozy writer, and if you've read some P.D. James, you would have heart failure at selling that to an American cozy fan, because there's quite a lot of violence in them, and she worked in forensics. She doesn't spare you that. And I think of cozies as much more a traditional mystery, but they do have, in this country, a lot of them are structured to be, I think, the crime fiction equivalent of romance. They have a relatively predictable setup and a relatively predictable plot. And the other thing I find really interesting is, and I ran into this when talking to an editor of a lot of cozies, is that they are generally female driven, whereas I think there are some perfectly decent male cozies, certainly traditional male led mysteries, but I think you can also have them in a lighter sense. And the problem that the amateur sleuth always faces is, who is going to do the actual criminal side of it? Who's going to do the deep investigation using police resources? Who's going to do the arrest? I mean, amateur sleuth can't, just slap handcuffs on and haul somebody off. Now, in the 1990s, there was a huge wave of what we called women's sleuth, and it was led by people like Paretsky, Sue Grafton, Marcia Muller, and in that iteration, it was always a female private eye, a female private investigator. She often had martial arts skills or other particular expertise. With Kinsey, she was an insurance investigator, for example, so she knew that. But in every book, there had to be some law enforcement figure in the picture. It didn't have to be a guy, it could be a woman, but most of the time it was a guy. And it was easier most of the time to turn them into some kind of a couple, either a romantic couple, or maybe they were brother and sister or father and daughter, but there was like a personal connection with it. In the same way that Lord Peter Wimsey's brother-in-law, Parker, was the Scotland Yard guy, if you read Dorothy Sayers. You know, Lord Peter could do a lot of things, but he couldn't actually arrest people, so he had his handy brother-in-law. And I think that in that whole woman sleuth thing with a woman and the partner has now carried over into the cozy thing. And, you know, you do need to give somebody that colleague, so to speak, or that partner in the investigation. So let's talk about Ty for a minute, because Josie, you know, this is her predicament. She's running an antique store. It's improbable in a way that this many murders would occur around her. That's the given we all have to accept, but we're okay with that, right?
And we call that the Cabot Cove effect, right?
Well,
shake your hand and you're dead.
Yeah, but you know, there is some credibility, at least in Josie's world, because there's so many outsiders coming into it all the time with deals, you know, with money, with antiques and all. It's not as improbable for a lot of crime to go on around her and to people to die. I mean, you know, it's way too many for real life, so you just have to buy into that. But Josie has the need of a partner. In fact, she winds up with two. She has a reporter who helps her out, and he's kind of a jerk, but at the same time, you know, he's being in it. Well, he is, you know, a reporter, and she has a soft spot for him. But let's talk about Ty, because he's evolved, and their relationship has evolved throughout the whole series.
Yeah, and he actually does not help her. The police chief, Ellis Hunter, does. And because I wanted Ty Alvarez, because I wanted Ty and Josie to be romantically involved, I had to get him out of the job of being the police chief. So he is now the head of training for Homeland Security for the tri-state area, which in that window of place is New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine. And I did that because you don't want to be writing, I didn't want to be writing Women in Jeopardy books where she's surrounded by all these men who come swooping in to rescue her. It has to be Josie doing the work. She has to do the deed. Now, the reporter, Wes Smith, who is, you know, half Yellow Jacket annoying and half kid brother annoying, but she does have a soft spot for him. He has contacts everywhere, so he can find out people's finances and alibis and so on. Ty guides her in the straight and narrow a little bit, where she never, that's her instinct, and she's never going to do the wrong thing, but sometimes she wants to take a little shortcut, and he just is like, you know, that's against the law, right? And no, not really, if I do it this way. Anyway, I think that's kind of fun. He's a great guy. I like him. I like Ty.
I like him too. Yeah, no, I like Ty very much, and I'm glad that he has evolved in that way. And I do think that sending him off, you know, to jobs outside of their community is a really good thing. It also offers you an opportunity to expand the series. If he's down in Washington, you know, it's possible that Josie can do some travel and so forth. Although most people who love series don't like the protagonist to travel far from home. Well,
I don't want to do any spoilers, but no one should worry. Josie's staying in Rocky Point.
Yeah, but it's fine if part of the investigation. I'm a huge fan of Archer Mayer. I love his Vermont-based police series. And Joe Gunther, you know, is absolutely rooted in Vermont. He was local in Brattlesboro, and then, you know, now he has a statewide remit and all the rest. But he has, over the course of, I think it's now 32 books, he has pursued investigations outside Vermont. in order to, I mean, the anchor case is in Vermont, but, he's been down to New York, he's been various places in pursuit.
Josie went to Boston once.
Yeah.
Maybe twice.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's credible to do that. But I do think that people come to your books, not just for Josie, but for the whole ensemble cast, for, as you say, Ty and Wes and Josie's good friend, and now the police chief, and then her staff, and and you don't ever let it stay static. So every time I open one of your books, I wonder, who's going to be up to what, who may leave, who may arrive, what are they doing, and that's life.
Thank you, Barbara. That's great. Thank you very much, Barbara. That means a lot.
Well, I think you've done a great job. Now let's talk. In this particular book, you have decided to look at an Egyptian antique. What brought that to your attention? And it is a cat, which is why there's a cat on the cover.
Excuse me. I decided I wanted to focus on cats. I'm actually a huge cat person myself. I love cats. And I think that the wisdom of cats is important. I don't mean to that sounds so silly as I say it aloud. I guess, excuse me. In these traditional mysteries, it is not unusual to find a cat. Josie's company has two, Hank and Angela, and they're both, by the way, based on cats I have known and loved. Thank you. My husband is slipping me another bottle of water.
Isn't it annoying when something like that, a coughing fit, overcomes you? It usually happens to people in the middle of a crowded theater or the movies. Or in my husband's case, he does this during football when he gets all excited. So you just have to roll with it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And it just swallowed air the wrong way, and there you go.
Right.
I really am just excited. I'm always excited to talk to you, Barbara. It's true. And I just want to mention for the record, every book that has come out, every one, my first stop is to go to Arizona to Barbara's wonderful Poison Pen bookstore. And we always have some event or other there. And it is always an honor and a pleasure. And I have been so sad that I couldn't come out. I'm in New York, you're in Arizona, that I couldn't come out this year. So this is what we're doing at this time, and there will be a Josie 14, and I look forward to being there next year.
Well, I certainly hope you will, Jane. It's really been a pleasure to do this with you. You've taught a couple of writing classes for us while you have been here, and I didn't mention that Jane has won an Agatha Award for one of her books on the craft of writing. Two Agathas, sorry.
Back there. Yeah.
On craft. So she's obviously made great strides over the years in not only writing her own books well, but learning it well enough to impart that wisdom to others.
Well, I want to come back to the cats, but while you're there, let me just make the following comment. I started studying the craft of writing to improve my own writing. I have found that by researching the nuts and bolts of books that I wish I'd written, that I just admire what they've done, with an eye for finding patterns, I did. And that becomes enormously valuable. Now I have this information, the question becomes how to apply it. Right. And that's what I've been working on in the last couple of books in particular. I really focused on writing better. I always try to write better, but that was more of an esoteric idea, an abstract thought. Now I'm being quite specific. I want to do this thing better. And I started writing articles for Writer's Digest magazine. I'm now a contributing editor for them. And that led to one of the first craft book. And really the big breakthrough was realizing I think I'm quite good at plotting. There's two ways people plot. You come up with a plot, And then you figure out what people would do those things, and that's how you develop characters. Or you develop the characters, and then you challenge yourself to figure out what those people would do. I'm the former. And so I developed my plotting roadmap, and that really seemed to resonate with a lot of people. It was a way of thinking about the whole idea that was new. So that's why the books happened. It's just been enormously gratifying. I'm actually offering free monthly writing webinars, and people can just go to my website, janecleland.com, sign up. It's free. It's an hour. And they're on topics about craft. In terms of back to Hidden Treasure and the cat and why, I wanted cats. And in thinking about cats, there's a fair amount of art about cats, and there's, it's hard to find the right antique. And so I have always had a certain fascination with why ancient Egypt revered cats. And, it is the goddess that was translated into this form. And you certainly see it when you know cats. What's the old saying? Dogs have owners and cats have staff. And, it's 100% true.
Yes. That's why I have dogs.
Oh, do you? Yeah.
Yes.
And if I'm a cat person, you should see my husband. Oh, my God, he's part cat. And you say that to him, and he goes like this. What do you mean? He has little comfort stations set up all around for them, and he does concierge delivery of their evening treats. So I know cats well, and I can imagine why a cat lover would have made her a goddess. The problem is that because they're popular, there's a lot of replicas out there. And so it becomes a question of how can we possibly tell if this cat is real? And that's what the book is about.
Well, not entirely, but yes, that's the central antique and the central antique mystery. And, in all, it seems to me, in virtually every book where antiques figure into the plot and are part of the motive, the real question is provenance. It isn't just, is it fake or not? But because even fakes have value. If you think about it, the Vermeer forger, Van Meegeren, some of his paintings are worth not as much as a real Vermeer, but a lot. So, whether it's real, whether it's fake, you're still stuck with this whole question of provenance. Where did it come? What is the chain of ownership? It's actually like real estate. I used to be in a law office back in Virginia, and its primary function was real estate law. And in order to sell property, you have to run a chain of title, which takes you, to the courthouse. And it's particularly interesting because Virginia was originally, that part of Virginia was part of North Carolina. So if you want to, if you go all the way back into the 18th century, which you have to do in a lot of cases, it's a whole chain that you have to work your way forward to. Who owned it? What were the restrictions? What were the covenants? What happened? And it's the same with antiques, isn't it? Really, you have to try to go back to the point of origin if you can find it, and then work your way forward and determine, all the things that are important. Who owned it? Who sold it? Was it sold? Was it stolen? Is this the real? Is this the fake? If it's the fake, does it have value? Blah, blah. And it just goes on forever. So I think... And
you just named the two ways it can happen. You start back, if you know where it was manufactured or crafted or painted, created, you can go from there forward. If you don't, you have to start with where it is now and go backwards.
Right.
Yeah.
And so obviously for Josie, she's going to have to do what? The go backwards part, because she has this thing, and the question is, what is it? And in the end though, isn't the value largely determined, Jane, by what anybody will pay for it? You can have something that might be to all intents and purposes valueless, but if somebody really wants it, then they'll pay a price for it, and that has some value. I'm always amazed at artworks, how they fall in and out of fashion. Particular artists. There was a piece in the New York Times Magazine last week about Rosa Bonheur, who, basically sank from sight, and now there's a whole kind of bring Rosa back routine going on. And, stuff that belonged to her or was relevant to her is suddenly taking on value from being essentially junk. And so there are whole cycles in, what's fashionable, what does somebody influential want, who's collecting what. And so value is a very slippery thing, I think.
Here are the factors Josie considers. First of all, rarity. How many of them were made? Then scarcity.
Right.
How many of them are extant? Then association, which is who owned it and was that person important or interesting or popular for some reason. Provenance, of course. Condition is very important. And then trends, the popularity. And that is what you're talking about right now, which is 100% true. And I think it's like anything else. What color is in season this year and why? And then it goes out, and 7 years later, it's probably back. The pendulums swing.
Well, absolutely. And I think, to stay on top of the antiques trade, you have to be able to ride with that. It would be ideal if you could forecast it. I mean, for example, I am forever being asked, what's the next big thing? What is going to be the next big bestseller or subgenre or so forth? And, it's really difficult to see that. If I could, I would obviously make smarter buys. So occasionally,
I was just going to say, what's your answer?
Well, over the years, it has varied dramatically, and there is a cycle that you can see when something is a runaway bestseller. Let's take the Da Vinci Code, which is probably the easiest example that I can offer. When it came out, and I did an event with his editor recently for a different book, and we had a really entertaining conversation after the formal event, he and I, about the Da Vinci Code, which I won't reveal. But in any case, once it came out and it became a bestseller, it creates this bandwagon effect. And so for like 2 or 3 years, every other book was a religious conspiracy thriller. And I called them Da Vinci clones. But the thing is that after a while, it becomes overweighted. There's so many of them that people get tired of it, because if that's all there is to read, it begins to pall. And the bad ones then tend to drag down the good ones. There are fewer good ones as time goes on, because the really good ideas and the good energy has already been burned up, and so you're getting more derivative kind of a stuff. And so
that's like the unreliable narrator of the After Gone Girl.
Yes, which I keep praying will disappear. Right. But what happens is I can see from customers' reactions and so forth that pendulum has pretty much swung. And then what is hard to see is what's the next one that's going to come along. And the one that came along after the Da Vinci Code was Twilight. So then we got a whole, deal there. And then we got Gone Girl. And then we got the whole, domestic suspense. I mean, basically, it's a reversion to Mary Roberts Reinhardt. If you really want to look at domestic suspense, it's basically about families, about women, mostly women, but sometimes men. The whole Jeopardy question, the whole don't go into the attic thing, except it's don't go off with that guy thing, or, seriously, you really married him? And, and now it's tipping more over into, and I don't really like this, there are a lot more where children are involved. And that's a place I don't like going. So I'm hoping that I will see the next new thing, and it may rise to some extent out of the pandemic. It may be that a real jolt like this is forcing a reset in what authors want to write and what publishers want to buy and what readers want to read. So we're seeing more historical fiction because it's escapist, and also there's a certainty in it. It's already happened, so you know how it came out, which is way better than wondering about this election. There's fantasy, is a lot more fantasy going on right now, and world building. I think the dystopian thing is giving way slightly to fantasy because it's so dystopian to live right now. Who really wants to read about it? So we'll see, how it goes. But I think that this is true, certainly in the antiques business, is what people want follows. I mean, if you read historical fiction, you know that in the Regency, people wanted to throw out their beautiful Chippendale or whatever it was, and they wanted to buy cheese, Napoleon brought it back, all this sort of Egyptian and furniture, and then it was incredibly dated within probably 20 years. And then everybody wanted to get rid of that, and then we got the Victorian stuff, and then people got tired of that. And so, in furniture, home design, this goes on all the time too. And so antiques obviously have to follow that because people want antiques as part of their decor, part of their everyday life. If they're not collecting it in a museum way, a lot of people like to have antiques just to surround them.
Thank you. That was fascinating. And so therefore, hopefully during this period of time, people want to spend time in the sweet and decent world of Rocky Point, New Hampshire.
Well, I hope so.
That's what I try to create, something that's sweet and decent, but not saccharine at all. People are real, and things happen, and they have their lives. But you're never going to see a child hurt or an animal hurt, heavens. And order will always be restored from chaos.
Yep. Well, I do think that your books are always very satisfactory in the sense that you bring them to a good end. Nothing's more disappointing than reading a book and having the end let you down. And I think you're very good at the way that you bring everything to a conclusion.
Well, that's exciting for me to hear. It's very hard, and I try hard to do it.
Well, you do. Now, I've been talking too much in order to spare you because I don't want you to have another coughing fit. But, Patrick, do we have any questions or comments that you would like to present? Sorry, Patrick's racing back on his snazzy tennis shoes here to fill us in.
Well, while we wait for Patrick, I will tell you that Dan Brown recommends my craft book.
Oh,
how
wonderful.
About that, huh?
I love it. Well, he's kind of a neighbor, so that's a really good thing. All right, Patrick, what do we know?
Well, let's see, Jane. There's a question about the cats, and any of your cats provide the inspiration for your fictional cats?
Could you repeat that, Bob?
Do any of your cats provide the inspiration for your fictional cats? We kind of touched on that, but people are fascinated by the cats.
Well, yes, and I will tell you that Hank is a platinum Maine Coon based on our platinum Maine Coon named Louie, who was the sweetest, most charming boy ever. And the name Hank came from a cat that my husband and I spent time with when he was on the road. My husband is a musician, and he traveled for 2 years with Les Mis. And the head electrician was named Steve, and Steve had a cat who traveled with him named Hank, a beautiful orange tabby. And the way it worked is they would break down the show. The crew and actors would get on the bus and off they'd go to the next city. Joe very often had a car and drove, and Hank wasn't allowed on the bus. Someone was allergic to cats, so Hank couldn't go on the bus. So Hank always got a ride because there was always somebody who was driving. And Joe, being the cat person, was always delighted to take him, and if I was there, I was delighted too. And to see Steve come out with his little carry case, and it went in the back seat, and he would open the little door, and he'd give Hank a kiss, and he'd whisper, "Be a good boy, Hank. I'll see you in Fresno," or wherever. It just was so touching and charming. And so that's Hank was the most loving boy. He's gone on to kitty heaven, and we named him Hank. That was Louie and Hank. Angela was based on my girl Angela, she ruled this place. She was a little girl. She ruled the place. She had a little white triangle there. And that's why I named her Angela, because angels wear white. And she was just as sweet as anybody. I have a photo of holding her when she was just a little bit of a kitten, and she put her paw there and just closed her eyes. And at that moment, I consider me wrapped around her little paw.
Well, it's nice that you can keep them alive in your books.
Absolutely. I cherish the memories.
Did you already ask if she has plans to write a different kind of series? Or
No, I haven't. Another question is, do you have plans to write a different kind of series?
You know, I wrote a middle grade mystery. And I think the mystery is pretty good. I'm pretty good at plotting. It did not sell. And the feedback was pretty consistent. And what I learned is that I don't have a kid's voice. I'm just not, that's not what I write. I wanted to try it because I love to read. You know, I've been a reader all my life. But I just thought it would be really fun to hook readers young. So that was my motivation. I am now working on something in a different genre. There's still a mystery in it, but it's more closer to women's fiction. And we'll see. This is, on one level, a project that will not die. I've been working on it for 5 or 6 years. And it's a bigger concept book. We'll see.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, there's a question that's, does Jane prefer to write craft books or her Josie series?
So the question is, do you prefer writing your Josie series or your craft books? Or are they, I would add, are they so different that it's not really a question of prefer?
It's actually a very hard question. And it's because I do like writing them both. They are really different. I think I find writing nonfiction harder. And I'm not sure why. The research that goes into the nonfiction is enormous. I had to read like 200 books in a year. And that's in addition, you know, I'm a full-time faculty member at one of the City University and New York colleges at CUNY. And I write and I do a lot of teaching, a lot of speaking at industry associations and conferences. And, you know, I like it all. I'm very fortunate to have such a multifaceted career. But man, those are hard to write. So I don't know how to answer that.
Okay.
I like it all.
That's about it, really.
And that's a fair answer. Patrick thinks that's about it. Want to give us a little preview of the next Josie? We can't really say much more about this book, which I think is fabulous. But
oh, thank you.
Well,
I'll
I do.
say one thing. If I can say one thing about
Sure.
this book. The dedication is to people who've given me second chances. And I wrote an essay. It's actually up on Criminal Elements right now. But I'm going to just give a little highlight. One of the characters in this book is named Maudie. She's an older woman, a woman of a certain age, who is in a tough position, and I'll leave it at that. But I was having trouble writing her. The character just felt pretty flat to me, a little cliched, a little trite. And I went back into my memory and I remembered a woman named Maudie. And so here's that little backstory. When my first marriage ended, the hardest part for me by far was losing his family. And among the family was his mother, my mother-in-law, Maudie. She was one of the finest women I've ever known, the most loving, accepting, non-judgmental, kind, everything good. And she accepted me unquestionably, and we became, I want to say, dear friends. And we stayed in touch a little bit, but it's pretty hard afterwards. But what she did, I'd never been particularly close to my mother, and really for all my life. And when Maudie, and I had to give up Maudie, more or less, I decided to give my mother a second chance the way Maudie had given me a second chance at maternal love. And I started calling my mother every day. And I made a commitment to myself that we weren't going to revisit anything in the past. The point was not vindication or anything like that. The point was just that I wanted my mother. And much to my astonishment, it worked. And we talked every day, sometimes for a couple of minutes, sometimes for much longer, and got back into one another's lives. At this point, she was living down in Florida. And we did that every day until the day she died. And I've always, since that experience, had just such respect and admiration for the concept of second chances. I love the idea of it. I find them inspirational. And I just thank you to everybody who's ever given me a second chance. And that's an important theme in the book.
A very important theme, and she is a wonderful character. And I see now that I'm looking past you that I could have counted your Agathas because you have 2 teapots on display, which the teapot is what is awarded the winner of an Agatha, which is an award from the Malice Domestic Mystery Convention, which slants itself towards the traditional mystery, the cozy, and the historical, in the same way that the Edgar, that funny little statue, is the award that the Mystery Writers of America give out, named for Edgar Allan Poe. My personal favorite, Jane, although I understand it's been discontinued, but Canada's Mystery Award is called the Arthur Ellis Award, and the award up until very recently, because Arthur Ellis was the pseudonym for Canada's hangman, was an actual little guy hanging from a noose. And I'm told that they've discontinued that because it was a little too macabre. But I've always thought I would love to own an Arthur Ellis sword, perched up there with this little guy going, whatever. So anyway, congratulations on the teapots, indeed. What are you doing for Josie 9? Can you give us just a little bit of a hint?
Josie 14.
Oh, is it 14 if I lost?
Yeah, this is 13.
Oh, my Lord. You're right.
I know. Isn't that something? And there they are in back of me over there.
Got it.
I'm not going to tell you.
Okay.
We haven't announced it yet. The manuscript is with my editor, and I'm looking forward to feedback. It'll be out next fall. I'm really, I got to tell you, excited about this book. It's a very special antique, and big things happen to Josie, and I'm excited.
Oh, good. Well, all right. On that note, I don't think we can possibly end it with a more exciting revelation there, even if it's not a revelation. So thank you, Jane. I want to thank all of you. I'm sorry I talked so much, but as you can see, Jane was really having trouble, so I thought I would just cover up.
I appreciate it.
Well,
and it's just a great pleasure to be here with you all. Sorry everyone had to hear me cough.
It's perfectly okay. You know what? We can't control everything that goes on around us. And I'm grateful that we have Zoom, because even if it's not as wonderful as your being here, at least it's an opportunity for us to connect. So thanks, Jane, for spending some time with us. Let me wish you a very happy holiday. And the same to all of you who are watching. Good night.
Good night.